Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, deadly protests in Peru have put pressure on the government to resolve a mining dispute in the country's southeast. We'll look at why some residents are fighting this project. And to do that, our digital producer, Omar Badar, is here looking out for all of the conversation online. And what are you seeing so far?
You know, Malika, the reason why we picked up on this story is because Peruvians online were tweeting about the deadly protests that took place last week, with many venting their frustration with the hashtag Las Bambas, which is the name of the mining project in the Apurimac region, which you can see on the screen right here. But of course, this isn't the first time that this has happened. Back in May, there were more deadly protests which took place here in Arequipa, which you can see over here. And the hashtag that people were using then was Tia Maria, which is the name of another controversial mining project. But as far as this conversation is concerned, the hashtag you need to use is AJStream. Tweet us and we'll get to those tweets during the show.
Está disparado en la espalda.
¿Con bala?
Sí, con bala. Tiene en la espalda la bala.
Ya. ¿Y todos los que han llegado acá también están con heridas?
Sí, todo con herida de bala.
Well, that video from our colleagues at AJ Plus shows the aftermath of an anti-mining protest that took place last week in Peru, prompting the government to issue a state of emergency in the southeast region. And protesters have been fighting a $7.4 billion copper mining project called Las Bambas. They accuse the China-backed company, MMG Limited, of changing the project's environmental plan and failing to employ more locals. Despite this, government officials have maintained support for the project, saying it will generate economic growth for Peru, a country where more than 50% of exports come from mining copper, gold, and silver. Now, as Omar showed us, this isn't the first time a mining project has created controversy. Deadly protests also occurred in May. In that instance, expansion plans were put on hold following the demonstrations. However, this time, the country's interior minister says protests will not stop the Las Bambas project from going forward. So today, we'll look into this dispute and whether the concerns of locals can be addressed. To help us do that, we're joined from Lima by Jose Carlos Requena, the editor of national news at El Comercio. Manuel Glave, a senior researcher at GRADE, that's a nonprofit research center focusing on development. Carlos Monge, Latin America director at the Natural Resource Governance Institute. And Rafael Hutmer, an activist and researcher at the Democracy and Global Transformation Program. Welcome to all of our guests. Now, before we get this conversation started, I do want to add that MMG and Peru's mining ministry declined to be part of this discussion. So, Jose, I want to start with you. What's the atmosphere near the Las Bambas mine like today?
Well, thanks. Hi. In the last days, what we have seen is dialogue. Executive authorities traveled to the area and have talked with mainly with the local mayors, with some representatives of the communities. Probably the big important absent in that dialogue was the participation of some of the protesters associated in or grouped in the Frente de Defensa, which is something like like a community-based organization. Mm-hmm. So at least on Monday, the agreement was basically three main agreements, and one of them was basically to lift the state of emergency once the protesters agreed to stop the protest. That hasn't happened yet, but at least that's one of the agreements. The second was something like some benefits for some of the victim relatives. There are three actually killed protesters. And the other, most importantly, I think, is to, the company agreed to inform, or rather, the executive agreed to ask the company to better inform the community. So that's basically, what has happened in the last days. Mm-hmm. Today and tomorrow are national holidays. So it's probably the situation will be kind of calmer these days. Mm. But, you cannot give anything for granted. And now the challenge is for the company and for the government to convince the people in the area that the mining project can go forward. This is important that the mining project is already kind of about to start. It was announced in the last mining conference like 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
That it was about to start in the first quarter of 2016. So it's not differently than Tia Maria or Tuconga, some of the projects that you mentioned in the video. Mm-hmm. This is a project that has been, ongoing for the last more than 10 years. You know?
So Malika, one of the questions that we put out to our online community is why do they think that the protests were driven out in the first place? What's actually taking place? And we have Ricky over here who says there is local perception that the wealth won't trickle down from these mining projects, same as Conga and Tia Maria. We mentioned one of those a little bit earlier. But we have Frid Tanharim over here who says the company needs to make the environmental impact study and the rights of Peruvian farmers must be respected. So now we seem to be looking at multiple things. There's environmental impact, there is the money trickling down. Rafael, can you tell us a little bit about what you think is driving those protests, if there's one particular demand that is really front and center?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation. The last time I've been in the zone, in the actual zone of the mine, was in March. And already in March, I think one could feel that there was kind of a tense situation, a lot of worries in the population that has been grown over the last months and ended in these protests. We in general always speak of two types of protests or two types of conflicts. The conflicts who are about alternatives or resistance against mining, the conflict in between different local developmental projects, or on the other case, conflicts of coexistence in which the populations through protest and other strategies negotiate the conditions of mining in their territories. So over the last months, the population, actually the social leaders who were in Lima this week showed me the 15 reports, letters they've sent to local authorities, national authorities, to ask for attention for the growing worries over the project in the zone. So I think the protest articulated different kind of grievances of the local populations. Mm-hmm. Some have to do with a very unequal distribution of the benefits of the project. Mm-hmm. Some have to do with the worries over working places at the project because the working force has been reduced dramatically over the last months. And some have to do with growing worries about the environmental impact of the project, but also due to the whole economic dynamic around the project. The closest village, Chaihuahuacho, has grown dramatically over the last years, and this has created a strong pollution of the local river. So all of the were articulated and expressed through this principal point of the demands of the local population. Mm-hmm. And that is the fault of clarity on the modifications, the substantial modifications.
So Rafael, you listed several demands there, which is, in protests, we usually do see several different demands being put on display. And one of the things you said was a conflict of coexistence. So I actually want to play, this is sound and video really from a protester who is one of those people making those demands. We saw protests earlier this month, last week, in fact, and some people traveled 10 hours to get to Lima to voice their demands. So I want you to have a listen to this, Carlos, in particular, and let me know what you think.
Nos estamos reuniendo para hacer protesta contra este asesino de Ollanta Humala, para protestar contra este grupo del poder que están invadiendo nuestras tierras, como en Apurimac, como en el Amazonas, como en Puno, como en Arequipa.
So Carlos, people are angry. He used the words invading our lands. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the expressions of the gentleman that you showed, the protester, mix two things. One could be immediately related to the fact that a constant expansion of the mining frontier, which has happened during the last 10 or 12 years of the so-called super cycle of the commodities, has brought about exploration and then investments to territories and to peoples that have no experience with mining, where mining has never taken place, people and territories that have already chosen other paths of development, and those are usually the places where these conflicts of resistance that Rafael mentioned happen, when you have a sudden expansion of the mining frontier to territories where nothing like that has taken place ever. But he's also mentioning something that is important, I think, to understand because it provides context, which is that these are areas that voted massively for President Ollanta around a discourse that was built on the contradiction between water and wealth, between traditional rural land and water-based activities and mining. And Ollanta won in these territories, in these regions, sometimes by, very high percentages. We're talking about 60, 70, 80% of the vote. And then for them, nothing has changed. So they believe that Ollanta is a traitor and has sold out to the traditional economic and political elites. And Niemann, they feel absolutely betrayed. So you have some, this is to say that you have some concrete, specific reasons that you guys have mentioned. Labor is down. They fear the environmental impact of the fact that now the processing plant is going to be installed in the area.
Right.
And not far away, and so forth. There are like 3 or 4 different reasons that are coming together, but there are also questions of context. One is this political one, and the other one, which is very important, is that during the initial phase of territorial accommodation and the implementation of the basic infrastructure, you have thousands of people hired, and an impressive growth of the urban towns. Charhuahuacho has grown from a few hundreds to a 20,000 people town.
Carlos, interestingly enough, we're having people who have, we got a video comment really that's an interesting take on how you spread the blame and basically what point we are at. It's from Alex here from Peru. Let's take a listen to this.
Hi, this is Alexander Segarra from Peru. The bad situation in Las Bambas mine came up due to the mismanagement from government and company and a lack of understanding from the community around this mine. Now the situation is back to normal. Company sources said the operation will start first quarter of 2016.
Manuel, on the part where he says, now the situation is back to normal, do you feel like we've hit something where now renewed violence has become unlikely?
Yeah, I agree with Jose Carlos when he said that not only because of this conjunction of the holidays, but the national authorities and the local government, the local leaders are trying to find out a peaceful way out of this protest. But I would like to stress a couple of things that is like I would like to distinguish the end point of a model based on the expansion of the extractive industries versus the specific case of Las Bambas. No? I think that when you see the whole picture, the whole package of protests against mines in Peru, as Carlos and other colleagues have been working on for several years, the Peruvian economy and the Latin American economies are reaching an end point of a model that has failed. And we are not sure what are the characteristics of the alternative model of sustainable development that can go with natural resources, with non-renewable natural resources. How the non-renewable natural resources can become a part of a new sustainable development strategy. So that is something that has to do with, for example, an institutional failure regarding land use planning, how to implement land use planning tools, and more strategically speaking, the failure of the decentralization process.
Well, Manuel, I want to pivot off of that a little bit because I hear what you're saying, and I want to pivot off of that just a little bit, picking up on something you said at the beginning of when you began speaking. You said there's a specific case of Las Bambas. So because this is a specific case, we are also talking about a specific company. We mentioned MMG, and MMG, in fact, has been actually really responsive to some of the protesters. They're responding to them on social media. This is their Facebook page, MMG Limited, and you see here there are a lot of concerns that were raised on their page. You can see the long string of comments, and they're replying to them saying, thank you for your posts. We acknowledge your concerns. We acknowledge your distress. So Jose, how has this relationship with the company and the community, the local community, how has that changed? Is it different?
Yeah, well, in general, I disagree with when Carlos implies that this is kind of a resistance. if using the categories that Rafael was using, I think this is more a coexistence conflict. And the project has been in the area since 2004. It's about to start. It's in the kind of 98, 95% according to the company and the government estimates. So it's kind of about to be ready. Of course, now the company has been hiring people like 18,000. Now they will hire probably 3,000. They have another problem with the transportation of the minerals. They have another problem with the changes in the environmental impact study. Yeah, there were problems that the company needs to solve for sure. But I mean, if we see that the project is about to start, something has been done properly, at least partially, because otherwise we would see problems like in Tia Maria or in Conga where the project hasn't started yet. So in this case, I think that both the government and the companies need to convince the people that this is something that will benefit them at the end. And again, this is very difficult because we have weak government at all the levels, both local.
Yeah, but
regions.
I do think that the issue also is that these coexistence conflicts do not necessarily mean that there are not a lot of grievances and problems in the local places. One of the issues that hasn't been mentioned so far is the level of tension, of conflict, and of violence in the zone over the last years. Actually, the 4 people who lost their lives during these protests are added to the major of Mara, who was killed in February of this year, to the family of an informal miner leader that was killed last year,
and something
to 3
that needs
people
to be
in
clarified
community
clearly.
conflicts that were also killed last year. So what I think both the company and the government do underestimate is the level of social and now starting also environmental impact in the zone that has caused that people are actually very tense, very angry also, specifically on the fact that some communities have received a lot of benefits and others do not. So I am not so sure that calm has come back permanently to the zone. I think this conflict changes the relationships fundamentally in between the company and the people, and actually need a very strong political response to move the project forward. I do think that both the population and the state obviously want the project to continue, but this conflict needs to fundamentally reformulate the relationships in between the local population, the local government.
Rafael, as you were saying that, I saw Manuel lean forward towards camera because he clearly wanted to respond to that. I just want to pause you just for a second, though, because I know our community also wants to respond to that. So I want to bring Omar and the community in.
So we have a little bit of pushback from Jeremy here on Facebook, who says that it is small illegal artesian mines that are the ones that create the vast majority of contamination in Peru and Bolivia. Large projects are forced to abide by strict international environmental laws and inspections. Anybody wants to take this section for that matter? Carlos, do you buy that?
Let me go back. Excuse me. Let me go back to what I was trying to say, because I actually agree with Jose Carlos and Rafael that this is a conflict of coexistence. This is not Tia Maria or Conga, where people are absolutely opposed to mining activity. But as Rafael was saying, a conflict of coexistence doesn't eliminate the concept of conflict. There is coexistence with a lot of conflict, and conflict emerges each time that something changes the gameplay that was arranged in the previous situation. What I was trying to say is that there is a context. One, there's political frustration because people feel absolutely betrayed by the government they elected in general terms. And second, there is frustration because, as Manuel was saying, there is no kind of planning. So you allow all these kinds of expectations, and the town raises from 500 to 20,000. And then at a certain point in time, the company has to reduce the labor force because they cannot employ sustainably 18,000 people to do nothing. So that the jobs disappear in the area. And now you have a ghost town with a lot of people with nothing else to do. And then on top of that, you change the environmental impact assessment without having a proper consultation process.
But Carlos, ghost town, that's presumably only until the mine begins operating in 2016,
no? Because when it operates, it only hires top 3,000 people. So there's going to be a problem.
Go ahead, Manuel.
The level of employment during construction is 6 or 7 times larger than the level of employment when there is the production phase. But I wanted to come back to one detail that Rafael highlighted that has to do with this unequal benefits between communities. It is well known for the people that are familiar with the Las Bambas project. There is one single community, the community of Fuerabamba, that has been subject to a resettlement plan. That it seems from all the information that anyone can gather, that is the largest compensation package ever one can imagine in a rural society in the Andean countries. So this is a community that with different estimations are more than 300 families being benefited with this resettlement plan, and the communities that are surrounding the project feel that they haven't been as benefit as Fuerabamba. No? There is a huge debate on how to implement a resettlement plan. Extrata Copper, that was the former corporation that was in charge of the project, made a tremendous effort to comply with the best standards of resettlement. But I think that this is underneath, no? This, like the neighbor communities are claiming more benefits, not only in employment, but also in health insurance or in other social programs. No? So I think that this is a crucial thing. And the last issue, the Las Bambas project is a project that has at least 3 open pits, a large collection of open pits. What it has been approved by the Peruvian state is only one of the 3 open pits. And in the actual site of the other pits, at least of one of the other pits, there has been a phenomenon of informal mining with local communities and external actors. And this is also underneath the urban growth, this irregular, disorganized urban growth in this town of Chalhuahuacho. And I am quite sure that politically speaking, the institutional mapping of the local communities have been dramatically transformed with the introduction of these informal miners value chain.
So we have people who are also commenting online about the broader political implication of all of this. We have Chavez over here who says, since 2011, Humala became president of Peru. It has had 5 conflicts that have destabilized the government. And then we have Sidrid over here who says the government is violently repressing the protests. More than 55 deaths with Humala due to the conflicts. How is no one responsible? Now, we did not independently verify those figures, but I'm just curious, Jose, what do you think are the broader political implications for people who are not directly impacted by these projects?
Well, there are some implications. Is that, the Humala administration is in the last year of the government, and it's already what you guys call lame duck. They are basically, it's totally unstable. The cabinet is pretty weak. So conflict like this, unfortunately, cause even more trouble for them. And regarding private investment, it kind of discouraged investment. And actually, I would like to mention the impact of changes in this situation. One is the changes in the ownership of the company, which was originally Swiss. Then it went to it went to Extrata from Glencore, now to MMG, and that changes even the plans, the original plans, And the other is the changes in the legislation. This government was very proactive to implementing some changes according to the reasoning to kind of
Jose, I'm going to pause you there on legislation because that's going to open a bigger conversation that we're going to have in our post show. What I do want to have the last 20 seconds or so time for in this main show is what's going to happen next. I want to share a picture here. This is from the Ministry of Energy and Mining on their Facebook page just a few days ago, and they showed the talks. They said that there was agreement. Rafael, in about 10 seconds.
Well,
agreement?
I think that if these agreements are being done without some of the most important social leaders, that this is putting the basis for the new conflict. Fundamental
a new conflict. All right, Rafael, I'm going to pause you there, and we will pick up on that in the post show. Stream.aljazeera.com. Welcome to our online post show. We've been discussing the impact mining operations have on local communities in Peru. And we're going to get right back into that conversation. I had to pause, Rafael, right before we headed into the post show. I was showing this picture from the Ministry of Energy and Mining in Peru on Facebook. This showed the agreement between local and regional leaders, supposedly agreement. Do you see protests continuing at this Las Bambas mining project, Rafael?
Well, I think that this could reflect the Espinar case, in which every now and then protests come up and take up the issues that weren't resolved before. What I do want to say is that the issue of the violence and the criminalization of the protesters is one of the main worries also of the local populations. We have people who were wounded, we have people who were shot dead, and we have people even in prison. And there are some indications that they're imprisoned due to irregular ways of fabricating the evidences of their involvement in the protests. So I do think that there are larger things that have to be resolved. And if not, this could constitute a new kind of far more conflictive relationship in between the company and the local populations.
And I see you nodding your head.
I want to
Go ahead,
jump
Carlos.
in to say that if the government and the company are not very, very careful, they can revert a situation from a conflict of coexistence to a conflict of resistance, because that has also happened before. Legitimacy is nothing that you acquire by a decree, it's something that you have to build and rebuild every single day. So not consulting, changing the environmental impact assessment and doing that kind of thing creates a sensation that the rules of the game have been violated. So far, the rules of the game has been of acceptance, but I think that the government especially is walking a very thin line here.
And if I hear you correctly, then that means that it's not yet too late. But I wonder if some people online question that. I want to show a video that's been shared online. This is via YouTube. And this is of protests that turned into injuries. So I want you to have a look at this. So this video was shared during one of the protests after people were hurt. And I heard you say, Carlos, that if the company and the government is not very, very careful, this could turn into something worse. Jose, you see this happening and you heard about the injuries and the deaths. Is it too late? Has this already kind of crossed that line?
I don't know. It's we don't predict the future, but what the government and the company should do is basically to try to be reliable. Unfortunately, sometimes you reach agreements. It's a nice picture, and at the end, none of the agreements are being finally granted. So the government and the company should be accountable and should be responsible when trying to solve the population concerns. Otherwise, there would be problems like Carlos was saying,
So we have, on the point of government violence, we have a tweet here from Mining Watch saying definitely progress is not possible as long as community interests and water supplies are marginalized and protests are criminalized and met with bullets. Rafael, is that a fair characterization to say that the government's response to protests is just firing bullets, or is there something more nuanced taking place whenever these shootings do happen?
I do think this is a very precise and important comment. I do think that mining companies and the government should realize that the level of violence that is almost automatically applied in these kind of conflicts is affecting their interests as well. There are some very structural problems that create that the response of the Peruvian government to protest against or around mining projects comes with a lot of heavy repressions resulting in deaths. Peru has far more deaths in the repression of social conflicts than our neighboring countries. And some of these structural issues have to do with police force that has been trained to act in context of terrorism activities are used to react to protests. That's one of the issues. Another issue is the confidence in between mining companies and the police that allow the police to work directly for the mining companies. These kind of practices generate the sense in the local populations that the state and the police are part of the interests of the mine and are not guaranteeing their rights. I think the only way mining can create other kind of practices is if the state really assumes their role of guarantee of rights of the local populations. And there is a lot to be done in this sector. And I think the declarations of the president of the Mining National Society blaming these protests on people who are trying to stop mining projects around the country are one example more of the kind of expression that shouldn't be done.
Rafael, as you were speaking, Manuel was again leaning towards his camera with something to say. So Manuel, I'm going to give you the last word because we are out of time. So close us off.
Oh, yeah, well, I wanted to add, if I have 30 seconds, one dimension that we haven't raised, that is the issue of adaptation to climate change in high mountains. This is a small landscape where water stress is going to be a binding constraint in the near future, and I think that potential conflicts regarding water quantity more than water quality are going to be there in the future for sure. But just to repeat my comment on land use planning, and the main challenge for the government and the company is how to embed the project into a social development plan that includes education, health, and infrastructure for the long term. No? That is the main challenge, and I think that Peru, as a whole, is in good shape to solve that challenge. But with all these shortcomings and institutional weaknesses that we have been discussing today. No?
Of course. You're hearing from Manuel Glave. You also heard from Jose Carlos Requena, Carlos Monge, and Rafael Hutmer. Of course, our community also joined us in this conversation. I'll give them the very last word, Omar.
I'll leave you with a couple of comments about the responsibilities of these companies. We have Bella over here who says, mining companies like other multinational companies should do business responsibly. Social and corporate responsibility should be a prerequisite. And then we have Salim here who says Peru is going through transformational national change. Mining companies need to be more proactive with community engagement.
A transformation we'll be watching. Now this conversation continues online with you using hashtag AJStream.